Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Friday morning. Lovely to see you, and thank you for being with us for our Bible reflection for today, continuing through the book of Proverbs. And friends, we're in chapter 25 today, so let's get stuck into the text, shall we? Because it's wonderful stuff. So Proverbs and chapter 25, here goes. These are the other Proverbs of Solomon that the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah copied. It's the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings is to search them out. Like the heavens for height, like the earth for depth, so the mind of kings is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and the smith has material for the vessel. Take away the wicked from the presence of the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Do not put yourselves forward in the king's presence, or stand in the place of the great. It's better to be told, "Come up here," than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. What your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court. For what you will do in the end, what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? Argue your case with your neighbor directly. Do not disclose another's secret, or else someone who hears you will bring shame upon you, and your ill repute will have no end. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. Like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise rebuke to a listening ear. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest are faithful messengers to those who send them. They refresh the spirit of their masters. Like clouds and wind without rain is one who boasts of a gift never given. With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue can break bones. If you found honey, eat only enough for you, or else, having too much of it, you will vomit it. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, otherwise your neighbor will become weary of you and hate you. Like a war club, a sword, or a sharp arrow is one who bears false witness against a neighbor. Like a bad tooth or a lame foot is trust in the faithless person in time of trouble. Like vinegar in a wound is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. Like a moth in clothing or a worm in wood, sorrow gnaws at the human heart. If your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. For you will heap coals on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. The north wind produces rain, and a backbiting tongue angry looks. It's better to live in the corner of a household than a house shared with a contentious wife. Like cold water to a thirsty soul, so is good news from a far country. Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain are the righteous who give way before the wicked. It's not good to eat much honey or to seek honor on top of honor. Like a city breached without walls is one who lacks self-control. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay. There's some lovely imagery in here, isn't there? It's really great. It's really quite funny. Anyway, so we're now into a kind of new section of the book of Proverbs. We've had sections which were just, which were Proverbs of Solomon. The last few were called sayings of the wise. And here, for the next few verses, few couple of chapters here, we have some sayings where they were Proverbs of Solomon, but were collected together later by the officials of King Hezekiah of Judah, which is some years later. And it's quite interesting, actually, because they kind of, although they are kind of, you can tell that they're Solomon's words, they've kind of been gathered together, they kind of, the flavour of them is they're more gathered together in groups. That's how they kind of group together. Some of them, as I say, are some of the imagery is fascinating here. You know, like a war club or a sharp arrow is one who bears false witness against a neighbor. Like a bad tooth or a lame foot is trust in the faithless person. Time it goes on. Like vinegar in a wound, like a moth in clothing, and so on. There are some lovely imagery here. It's very it's beautifully put. So do feel free to enjoy it later at your leisure. There's absolutely lots in here, and as I say, it's a lovely chapter to read because it's just good fun. So, verse 1, you have kind of the description of who's written it. So these are Proverbs of Solomon, collected together by officials of King Hezekiah. And in verses 2 to 7, we have some things about the king, really. Firstly, it talks about God is mysterious, but kings need to know what's going on. You know, God is mysterious, God is God, but kings need to know what's going on in the place where they're ruling. I mean, it's always been said about, often when decisions are made in government on the basis of poor information. So it's the importance of them having the right information. And then later on in verses kind of 6 and 7, he talks about the importance of not being sycophantic. Jesus told a story about a wedding feast, and he says it's better. Jesus said himself in one of his parables, don't put yourself in the honoured place. Put yourself in a lower place, and someone will say, "Come up higher, friend." As opposed to a sycophant who puts themselves first and then ends up having the embarrassment of being put down. So verses 2 to 7 talk about the importance of rulers knowing what's going on. Human rulers need to know what's going on. God is mysterious, but human leaders need to make judgments and assessments on the basis of good information. But it's important for the rest of us of not being sycophantic, of making sure you don't push yourself, don't be too pushy in front of rulers, and so on. Then in verses 8 to 10, he talks about strife and arguments. And essentially he says, argue your case with your neighbour directly. So he's talking really here about, arguments happen, but the importance of doing it as privately as possible. If we have rows, we should try not to put them on the front page of the newspapers, really. So I mean, Jesus talked about it in Matthew in chapter 18. When something happens in the church, talk to the person. If someone's doing something wrong, point out to the person privately. Then take two of you before you go public, so to speak. So when disputes happen, they were saying here in verses 8 to 10, keep it discreet. Try and sort it out privately before you go public. By goodness, if only the church could learn that one. It's such an important thing, and don't just disclose the secret. Don't gossip it around. Let's try and keep these things as discreet as we can. So when arguments happen, which they inevitably will, they're going to happen. They're absolutely going to happen. But let's be as discreet about it as much as we possibly can. Then verses 11 to 13 talks about a lovely word. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting silver. Like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise rebuke to a listening ear. So it's just a lovely picture here, really, of what a good word can do. That a kind word spoken can make a massive, massive difference. And it's, again, beautiful imagery of what a good and a kind and a helpful and a properly delivered corrective word can do. Talks about like apples of gold in the setting of silver. It's a beautiful picture here. What a good word, a helpful word, a properly delivered corrective word can do. That's really, really important. Verse 15 talks about the importance of patience and persistence. Again, something we could do more of in church life. People often give up far too quickly. With patience, a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue can break bones. It's about the importance of patience. Interesting, when Jesus talks about the parable of the sower, and about the soils, you might say, of the parable of the sower that sowed the soil onto the seed on the 4 different soils. And the last one, the good soil, made 30, 60, and 100-fold. But in Luke's gospel, he says, are like those who kept the word and did it with patience. It's about the importance of hanging on in there and being patient and being able to kind of wait on God, something we're often not very good at doing. That's kind of really important too. So the importance of patience. Then in verse 16, again, this is something which is quite unique to this chapter, really, about the importance of being contentment. If you have found honey, eat only enough for you, or else having too much, you will vomit it, which is kind of a lovely picture. God's good to us, but we shouldn't be greedy as such. We shouldn't always be consuming more. We should know. I mean, God gives to us abundantly, but we should be able to know when we've got enough. Our whole life shouldn't be, as somebody once said to me, a couple of parishes ago, my aim in life is to earn as much money as possible and to spend as much money as possible. And I just thought how incredibly sad that is. And much as society tries to go for that, but it isn't a recipe for a happy life, actually. We need to kind of know our limits too. Then finally in verse 20 and 21, if your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. And if they are thirsty, give them things. If you'll heap coals of fire on their head, and the Lord will reward you. And it's really talking about the importance of forgiveness. St. Paul quotes this in Romans 12, chapter 12, verse 20, about the importance of forgiving people who persecute us, of not seeking revenge, of not being quick-tempered, about not trying to seek revenge, but actually handing that hurt over to God, letting God deal with it, and we will be rewarded, and God will sort it. So lots again in this chapter. First, you've got a change of gear here. We've got some new Proverbs of Solomon collected by these officials of Hezekiah. You've got some words to the rulers, which are about the rulers need to have proper information to make proper judgments, and about the importance of not being too pushy, not trying to push ourselves forward too much, otherwise we look silly. Verses 8 to 10, about as much as we can, trying to keep our arguments discreet, and not trying to go public too quickly. Try and sort things out with our neighbour directly, rather than going to the front page of the Express Bazaar or whatever it may be. Verses 11 to 13, about the importance of a kind word, being beautiful, about like an apple of gold in a setting of silver. How much good we can do by being with a kind and a helpful word. Verse 15, about the importance of patience and persistence and sticking on in there, about being resilient in our Christian faith. Verses 16 and verse 27, about the importance of knowing when we've got enough, not just being greedy and pursuing stuff for its own sake. And about in verse 21 and 22, about the importance of, with our enemies, of handing over the hurt to God, letting God deal with it. Because as God says elsewhere, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. And that's also spoken of in the book of Romans by Paul, of course, who was persecuted by the self-same Romans in Romans 12, verse 20. So, my friends, lots to think about. Have a lovely day. God bless you. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you for being with us. Do share this message with your friends. Do read Proverbs 25 again. God bless you. Thanks for watching.